There's a lot of information out there on the internet on what to do if you have tight piriformis, piriformis syndrome, sciatica, and issues associated with problems of compression of the backside of the pelvis right here. But there's a whole lot less information on what to do if those problems are only on one side. First, let's start with what the piriformis actually does. Because it attaches on the sacrum and the femur itself, what it has the ability to do is bring these two attachment sites closer together. So what it's going to do is it's going to close off this space in the back right here. If that space is compressed and closed, then the sciatic nerve, which runs through this area, can have compression because this area is tight and the piriformis is basically entrapping it, and that can cause those issues related to tight piriformis. Now, when I see issues on one side more so than the other, it's usually because the pelvis is in an asymmetrical position. So what we tend to see is one side of the pelvis is more forward than the other. And when that happens, one side is more forward. The side that's more forward tends to have more external rotation of the hip, which means that represents this space closed off more. Naturally, what that means is the side that is rotated more back is less forward. That side is going to have more opening of the space right here. This is going to be more of an internally rotated pelvis right here. At this point, you may be asking, well, Connor, how do I even know which side of my pelvis is more forward? Well, I would encourage you to go off of objective tests. Don't go off of what you think is the case, because sometimes that can be misleading. Go off of what objective assessments are going to tell you. So if you were to measure your hip internal and external rotation, you are going to have usually more external rotation on the side that is more forward. A great way to visualize this is to get in a seated position and literally push one side of your pelvis a little bit more forward than the other, and then measure your hip external rotation, and then measure it on the side that's back. And then try it with the other side forward. And you'll see that whenever that side is more forward, you pick up more external rotation. Now, this is usually the case, but not always the case, which is why we need to use other tests to check our work to make sure that we actually are going to do the right thing on the more forward side. The other thing you can do is hip flexion, because hip flexion is a measurement of external rotation. So if your hip is more externally rotated on one side, you'll have an easier ability to pull that knee to your chest slowly. Now that's two, so people might be split down the middle there. Let's give you a third test to make sure that you hit 2 out of 3 at least of one side to know which side is more forward. That's going to be a straight leg raise test, because a straight leg raise assesses after about 45 degrees how much internal rotation your hips can go into. So if one side is better than the other, it's usually because that side can access more internal rotation of the hip. So the side that's more forward and externally rotated is going to have a worse straight leg raise. Let's start with the more forward side, because based off of what we just talked about, it's pretty easy to understand that on this side, you're going to have a more chronically shortened position of the piriformis. This is going to be compressing the backside of the pelvis constantly, because we can't get lengthening on the backside of the pelvis and internal rotation. When we are at about 90 degrees of hip flexion or hip bend, this promotes natural internal rotation of the femur and opening of the outlet, the backside of the pelvis. So I'm going to show you an exercise you can do to promote opening of that side. And you'll know you're successful with this because your straight leg raise and hip internal rotation should feel a little bit better after doing it. All right, now for this one, what you're going to need is something around or just below waist height, a little ball or some sort of an object like a towel rolled up, thick enough to where when you put it in between your thighs, you can still keep your hips in line with your toes and your knees in line with your toes and your hips. You're also going to need a book about this thick. But what you're going to do is place the side we're working on, that would be the left side for me, which is the more forward and externally rotated side, place that foot on the book. The book needs to be big enough so that way your whole foot can remain flat. And then you're going to place that other foot just a half step in front of the other one. So that way the toes of the back leg are in line with the midfoot of the front leg. Take that ball, put it just above your knees and between your legs, bend both knees, and now put your hands on your hips and just shift back a little bit. You're going to hit a point where you feel a little stretch in the back of your hip right here. It's not hugely significant, it's just a bit. So bend both knees, find that stretch back there just a little bit. You should never feel any pinching in the front of your hip. What you will feel is a little bit of your inner thigh adductor muscle kick on right here. And that's good because that muscle is helping secure your femur in the back of the hip socket. So I'm here, leaning back a little bit. You can support your body weight now and just start to breathe into that position, in through your nose, out through your mouth. You might want to play around with a little bit of a posterior pelvic tilt to help keep your back relaxed and feel that stretch a little bit more. Throughout this, you want to keep your weight mostly in the heel on the back foot, but both feet are relaxed and they're flat. As you get better at this, you can start to oscillate back and forth like this with the ball. That's what it's there for. So you can start to push one knee forward, pull the other back, and as you do that, you need to stay heavy on the heel of the back leg, and you're really focusing on feeling that adductor inner thigh as you pull back, and then relaxing and moving forward. And you can do that for about a minute or two. From there, you can start to place your hands on that and get a little bit deeper into it and do the same exact thing. Just make sure you never ever feel a pinch in the front of your hip, because if you do, you went down too far. Appreciating asymmetries and how they can influence certain issues on one side or the other and addressing the root cause is a foundational principle of my programs, like my beginner body restoration program. So if you like exercises like this and this type of an approach, go check it out. I will link it down below in the description. Okay, now that's one possible scenario, but you could also have a situation where you feel tightness of the piriformis and issues related to it on the side that's actually rotated more back. Let's use the right side in this example. The reason for that is, remember, the piriformis creates external rotation, but sometimes your glute max, which is the biggest muscle on the backside of your pelvis and is also your primary hip external rotator as we move through a lot of common movement patterns, sometimes that glute max isn't going to be able to do its job very well because that pelvis is open in the backside and that glute max can't effectively close it and create external rotation. So that piriformis is working overtime and in overdrive to create compensatory external rotation, so that way you can find that as you move through the gait cycle, for example. You're gonna need to find a way to find external rotation. If your glute's not gonna do it, on the side that's rotated back, your piriformis is gonna find a way to do it for you. So what you would want to do is educate the glute max how to push yourself out of that side and properly close this space in the back and promote more external rotation. I'm going to show you a way you can do that. To set up for this, we're gonna be on our left side with a small towel roll underneath the left lowest ribs to get us slightly passively side bend to the left. And we also have a little towel roll about 3-ish inches thick underneath the lowest foot here, keeping both feet flat on the wall with the toes straight ahead at all times. So what we're gonna do to start here is we're just going to get a very slight tuck of the hips, a little posterior pelvic tilt, and maintaining that, focusing on putting pressure into the wall with the medial arch of the right foot, which is the inner heel and the first met head right here. We're going to slide that right knee forward. Again, make sure the toes are straight on the right. And then we're going to push the knee up as far as we can get it without losing any contact of that right medial heel on the wall at any point. As he does this, he should feel his right lower butt cheek engage, and he should feel a little bit of his right outside hip where his glute med is too. He's gonna sit here, breathe in through his nose, out through his mouth for about 5 breaths. If you're having a hard time finding your right glute, what you could do is just take a half step forward with the right foot and then just do the same exact thing. And that can be enough for some people to feel a lot more right glute. The other thing you can do is put a light band, very light, around the top of the knees, and that should give you just enough resistance to feel your right glute as you go forward and up. The most common mistake on this activity is that people are not going to push the right knee far enough ahead and keep it up. They're gonna have that right knee drift back as they start to get tired, so make sure you're keeping it going forward and up, but not at the cost of losing that right inner foot arch. Make sure that's always the thing that has pressure into the wall, about 4 to 5 out of 10. The other thing is that people will try to slide their right knee forward via extending their low back, so make sure that you have that happy medium between keeping the hips slightly tucked and pushing the knee as far forward as you can without losing that hip tuck. I would recommend doing the exercise that's best for you for about 2 sets of 5 to 10 slow, controlled breath cycles as I describe in the video. You can do this both in the morning and at night for maximal results.